Can I put in a plug-in for one of my favorite topics, which I think is going to evolve, is going to explode, is real-world data. So real-world data will address some of these problems, because even with large clinical trials, I mean, look at the Aspire, which is a massive clinical trial, you still don't have the experience of thousands of patients being treated, and we're learning. I'm engaged in several of those projects. So for instance, you can cross-reference this with, admissions for heart failure, et cetera, and you actually get a much better picture that is reflective also of the real world because of the eligibility concerns you mentioned before. So I think we'll learn a lot more. Organizations like the MMRF is working on this. I've been working with the myeloma crowd with Health Tree as well too. So there's a number of opportunities where data will be collected, and I think our wisdom will be greater.
We are going to be starting a very large patient registry in the near future, probably in the fall. So, and we'll be collecting a lot of data from patients in that effort. So
I worry a bit now that these regimens are becoming so complex that, for all the reasons you just spoke about, what's the right dose of carfilzomib to use? Should you use it once or twice weekly? What about infection prophylaxis when we start combining them together? The community's still using 8-hour infusions or split dose instead of 90 minutes. I worry that the bad things will be amplified in those real world things, and I feel less and less comfortable with having a lot of inexperienced physicians looking after these patients personally.
We definitely need to help to simplify it. But I want to bring patient's perspective very quickly. Because we had trial where we had to use per trial for 2 years, 24 months of KRD treatment. Median duration of treatment on this trial was 24 months, which means that most of the patients completed treatment as planned. I spoke with those patients later on, and of course during the treatment, and I'm hearing unanimously the same. The patients always waiting convenience versus ultimate benefits. If there was such a high level of achieving complete responses and durable responses, and for most patients, fairly good tolerability, because KRD, for the most part, with few exceptions, is very well tolerated. There was no question about it that they didn't regret that commitment for their freedom of being in remission for years to come.
And one of the things that we sort of alluded to earlier is overall survival, and certainly the only two trials to date that have shown an overall survival advantage in relapse are the carfilzomib-containing trials, Endeavour and Aspire, although I'm sure we'll see the Pollux trial showing that. If it hasn't already, I might have missed it, but the overall survival advantage.
I think the Eloquent had overall survival update too. I believe so,
yeah.
Even though it's not a common regimen, but it just
And then the other thing that we did on some of these trials was the health-related quality of life assessment. I think those things together with the economics, but with the Aspire trial, and I think in Endeavour too, but particularly the Aspire, which I know better, the health-related quality of life globally improved during treatment, as well as, so even though we were spending more money on 3 drugs, overall survival was better, progression-free survival was better, and quality of life was better. So I think all the things you need for value were there.
One of the important points for patients who may read very dated literature, they'll come to the office and sometimes say, listen, I'm more about quality of life than quantity of life. The good news is if you are mindful of toxicity and myeloma, both are one and the same. Because as you improve their disease, as the bone pain gets controlled, the quality of life comes up, and certainly all the clinical trials suggest improvements in overall survival. Now, again, real world data, which can show this when trials doesn't, there's massive improvements in the survival of myeloma patients. We're not there yet. We're not celebrating that we have reached our goal, but there is no denying that the survival has significantly improved.
Well, thank you for a great discussion. It's been extremely informative. Before we sign off today, I'd like to get final thoughts from each of our panelists. So, Mary, what do you want to leave as your parting gesture here, your parting thought?
So I would, one of the biggest areas of need, I feel, is education of the community healthcare providers. I mean, that's where the vast majority of our patients are treated. And these community doctors need a lot of education and a lot of help keeping up with all the new developments in myeloma over the years. And I'm hoping that collectively the community can come up with ways of really, keeping the community physicians on track, which will totally benefit our patients.
I would 100% agree with that. I don't know how I can only keep track of one disease. I don't know how my colleagues in the community do it. It's amazing. Raphael?
So despite what at first glance may seem an incredibly complex field for drug selection, I think it's going to get simpler, because I think there's 2 or 3 common pathways that are going to converge thankfully. But the support and the care of myeloma patients is going to get infinitely more complex, as you just alluded to. So we have that conundrum. I think our treatment selection is going to be simpler. Prophylaxis, decision making, when do you escalate, when do you change, incredibly complex. So I think the participation, in partnership with the community doctors is critical. The second point is this is all possible because of clinical trials. And I have to say, Andrea, I'm very impressed because of your reference to your participation in clinical trials, because that's what we should all be doing, active participation in trials to move the needle forward so actually we have the right answers for our patients.
Last word to you.
Yeah, we do help patients by providing them with that opportunity if there's a right trial for a given patient. But I want to say that thanks to that particular experience and thanks to the trials which have generated the data which we have shown, I think that we are at the stage where we can start very seriously revising goals of our therapy. And that eventually will also affect our treatment choices. Even if we cannot declare at this point that we are curing myeloma, many of us believe that some patients are indeed getting cured. So if we set up our discussion, our treatment plan with that goal as ultimate goal, even if we don't achieve it, in the process, we are achieving good outcome for the patient because they stay at least along in remission. So I think that will eventually help us to simplify our choices and make it easier.
Well, thank you, all of you, for your contributions to this discussion. And on behalf of our panel, we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have found this AGMC peer exchange discussion on multiple myeloma be both useful and informative. Thank you.